So welcome to another edition of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero, where we explore the philosophy of Ayn Rand and Objectivism to live a life that's heroic, that we can't wait to wake up to. And today I'm speaking with Kim Sawyer, who specializes in business consulting, especially around the realms of wealth and effectiveness. And I met Kim at the last Atlas Summit. Very interesting guy. We've had a couple conversations along the way. We're not going to go deep into philosophy today, unless we do. But that's perhaps a later episode, because there's some serious meta-ethics questions that we're both fascinated in, and we're going to be having that conversation at some point. But for today, Kim, could you tell me a little bit about your business practice and how it is that you describe yourself? Because I've heard a number of different pieces.
So I am a coach. I am a coach in the realm of business. I work with business people in the same way a coach works with an athlete to help them play at the top of the game they're capable of, to take their personal best and raise it to a higher level by adding the things that they don't have and that they don't otherwise do, so that they can be stellar instead of outstanding. That's my job. The sport is business, career, companies, your job, whatever is entrepreneurs, whatever is involved in the process of creating productive wealth in the world. Now, there are life coaches out there, and they work with people to have better lives, and business and career is a slice of that, so they touch on it. But my approach is sort of inverted from that. I coach people to be successful in their business and professional world, but you can't leave your life at home when you go to work. It all goes with you, for better or for worse. So oftentimes we have to take a look at issues apart from work and other areas of life that enhance people's effectiveness and performance at work. So my goal is peak performance, clarity on what success looks like, and the best possible path to get there. Related to that is transitioning through really radical change in an effective way, because coaching is most valuable when people are taking on a major change, going through a major change. So that's my work. I coach individuals. I coach teams, management teams. And I also coach recently organizations in helping them build a coaching culture within the organization where they're coaching one another as a way of doing business. So that's it. That's what I do.
Too easy. And I'm going to want to get into that quite a bit. So one of your taglines is "Wealth is more than money, and everyone walks away wealthier." Right? These are things, as my moniker is the profitability coach. And it's all about creating profitability in the various areas of your life, starting with business, because I work with entrepreneurs. So the areas in which we have overlap and we're simpatico on that are exciting to me, and I certainly want to get into that as we move forward. I have a question I like to start off with, since this is becoming an Ayn Rand hero. Oh yeah, it's a very difficult question, which is, how did you get involved with Ayn Rand? What's your story? How did she come into your life? What was the impact? What's your origin story with Ms. Rand?
Yeah. My objectivist story.
Yes.
That's so funny. I meet people and get on the phone for the first time with fellow objectivists, and the first thing you do is, okay, let's tell each other our objectivist story. Mm-hmm. And so we all have one. It's sort of like, how did you fall in love with your wife, right? It's that, and it's a wonderful story, because like when I fell in love with my wife, when I found Ayn Rand, it changed my life in radical ways that continue to this day. Oh, gosh. Okay, so 13 years old, loner, kind of scared, mixed up kid, spent a lot of time by myself, reading, building models, trying to find a way to get through my day because I just really wasn't very comfortable in my skin. So I read a lot, and so I was constantly going through my mom's bookshelf and grabbing a book. And as I got older, I grabbed the thicker books and the more interesting books. One day, I grabbed this dusty old fat paperback off the shelf called Atlas Shrugged.
And how old? And how you were 13? This is when you were 13?
Yeah, 13. And I started reading it. And I felt like I had stepped into some sort of bizarre Twilight Zone alternate reality. I did not understand a lot of it. I did not understand what I was experiencing. All I know, it was this completely other than everything I had thought and experienced about living life. It upended all the beliefs and opinions that I had absorbed, assimilated, and otherwise grabbed as I went through my life to that point, and it just turned them upside down, and I felt like I was falling. Now, it was scary and disorienting, but it was also awesome because I loved this world. It was this technicolor world where things were clear and made sense, and it was about me finding value in myself as a being. That was the core message I got out of it at 13, and I needed that message at 13 years old for a variety of reasons that we may or may not talk about more later today. And so I tore my way through it. And boy, my brain hurt. Okay, I mean, the philosophy of it. I understood just enough to be hungry to get it, and it was helping me make sense of things that I had experienced and thought intuitively and implicitly, or things I had doubted and not been willing to accept, but didn't know what to offer up as an alternative or why that seemed unacceptable. It offered me possibilities to resolve so many of those things, but I just was not developed enough to go into the depth. But I love the story. I struggled my way through those things, and I went to my mom, and I said, "Good grief, what is this? Where did you get it? Did you actually read it? And if so, why didn't you give it to me before?" And my mother is a wonderful woman, and she just said, this is sort of like religion. You don't tell your kids what they're supposed to believe and where they're supposed to go and what they're supposed to do or not. You just allow them to be exposed to things, and they come to those conclusions on their own. And she'd always allowed me to do that in almost everything. Any time I came to her with a question, it was, "Well, why don't you go off and think about that and come back to me with your ideas, and we'll talk about it."
Yeah, Mom.
I can look back and see that objectivism in how she related to me, but she never wanted to put it on me. And she said, "I figured sooner or later you'd stumble across it." She said, "If not, when you graduated from college and were about to leave or go off to college and leave the house, I might have given it to you for a graduation present. But I'm glad you found it." And so that was it. I ran from there. I tore it up. And then it was the Fountainhead, and then it was Anthem. I love Anthem to this day. It's like a piece of poetry. And then I began digging. And We the Living. Oh, God, I think We the Living is Ayn Rand's masterpiece artistically. I think it's the best novel she's written in terms of richness and power and diversity and passion. Atlas Shrugged is great, but it's much more philosophical. And We the Living is just a fantastic piece of drama. Anyway, that's my belief. And then I started tearing through the nonfiction. And anyway, so yeah, on and on. It was good and bad for me in a lot of ways because I was not in a place in life where I had kind of found who I was with people in the world. and any real confidence in myself because of some things I kind of grew up through. So it was a great way for me to distance people. You know, I think rationally. I have a clear view of the world. I can explain why I think what I think. I can explain why I do what I do. Why can't you? And as a matter of fact, if that's what you think, you're the problem. I want nothing to do with you. And I managed to basically justify my isolation from most of the world, which helped me feel better about being worried about whether they were going to accept me or not. And there was anger behind it. I had a bunch of anger in me from childhood, and I just projected it out on all the irrational second-handers. And I mean, I bought into this whole sort of angry edge of Ayn Rand, some of which she had, and some of which was just available there for those of us that already carried that. And that wasn't helpful. I became very argumentative with people, very militant.
I of course know
gradually
nothing about that.
Go ahead.
I said, I of course know nothing about that. I actually one of the pieces that I've written around Ayn Rand is a piece called "The Trap of the Ayn Rand Speech," which is just because her philosophy is coherent, because she's got ideas that are well thought out about these very specific issues. It's so easy to get into speech mode and argument mode. Right, and not to use the wisdom that your mother demonstrated.
Yep. So basically, I was throwing arguments at people. I wasn't really listening to what they had to say or their ideas. As soon as I was hearing some of the tag words of the second-hander, I immediately categorized it, judged it, and tossed it, and dismissed everything else they had to say because they suddenly became their ideas. They weren't a human being. And it was a mess. It really was a mess. And it made me angrier and angrier as more people didn't agree with me and as I got more oppositional with people. I began to meet a few other objectivists, though, gradually, here and there. One of my friends from high school had read Ayn Rand. I didn't know it, and we bumped into each other one time at a after football game Friday night party, and somehow that came up, and we started talking, and we spent the next 3 hours of that party going deep and intense, and people, before we realized, people were gathered around us listening to what we were talking about, and he and I are friends to this day, close friends. Matter of fact, he was there in Las Vegas with me at the summit, and he's my best friend to this day. We've been through a lot together. And then gradually a few other people. And then I discovered there were sort of little pockets of objectivists out there, little objectivist salons and little objectivist groups. And I began to try to get involved as I got into college with some of them. And then I began encountering some of that really weird sort of objectivist. Oh, God. I don't want to say Nazism because that's not an accurate use of the word.
But dogmatism.
But this whole, it terrible. I mean, it was abusive. You know, if you don't think this and you don't think that, you're not really objectivist, and we're extricating you from the group. And you know, it was, I mean, I began to witness some of that happening in these small, closed circles of people. You know, it was, and I didn't like it, and I believe to some extent a lot of that kind of grew off in the direction of the Ayn Rand Institute, which fortunately more recently has been opening itself to the bigger world, but I began to think this is like, these people are looking at this like a Bible, right? If Ayn Rand didn't write it, it ain't true. And if you claim to think anything other than this body of information that we can point to in the words on the pages published to and copyrighted by Ayn Rand, you aren't actually an objectivist. And I began to really get turned off by all that. It didn't turn me off to objectivism, but I began to stop referring to myself as an objectivist, and I began talking about myself as just a person with a rational philosophy, which is the way I've
pretty much
stayed today. Okay, and then I even get to the point, it's like, well, you know, it's even a shame that we have to have an ism for rational philosophy. I mean, do we have an ism for accurate physics? Is there a special form of physics that's accurate that we call
physicsism?
Physicism, right?
Chemistryism.
No. Yeah, so this is the first science. and it's a science, and it's either getting the answers correctly or it's not getting the answers correctly, like any science. So I stopped really calling myself an objectivist, other than to other objectivists, because they get it. So anyway, I went through a lot of that, and objectivism was wonderful for me. It challenged me to become very deliberate in my thinking. It challenged me to dig underneath everything I thought and develop a line of reasoning as to why I thought that. It challenged me to develop a line of reasoning behind all the choices I made, and to really look at my life as a whole, and to begin putting things in place that made sense. The objectivist epistemology. When I was in college, about my second year, I tore through that. I had read it once, but I tore through it, and all of a sudden, learning made sense. Knowledge made sense. I got definitions. I understood what that meant, the hierarchy of concepts. I began to go to all my classes and take notes in outline form. The broadest concept, it was the focus of the science, the subconcepts of those concepts. It opened up the whole world to my ability to take in knowledge and assimilate it and integrate it, and then relate it to the other knowledge I had. And so I was looking at how the sciences related to each other, how things stem from philosophy. I was doing wonderful outlines of all human knowledge, starting with metaphysics all the way out. And I was really getting in my head, like a roadmap that people develop of the city they live in. I was getting in my head this sort of roadmap of the areas of human knowledge and thought, and how they held together. And it just, golly, I owe all of my mental acuity to Ayn Rand, for sure. And so it also got me in a bunch of trouble, okay, in a lot of ways.
How so?
Okay. And it wasn't it was me, right? But
yeah.
I had issues that I needed to deal with, and I ran off into objectivism to avoid them. And I started trying to become Ayn Rand heroes, right? That's what I did. I picked a persona of one of her heroes, and for a while I was trying to be that person, right? And that's it. I wasn't.
Which hero? Or
I was into Ragnar.
You were into Ragnar? Ooh, interesting choice. Nice. Ha ha.
To this day, yeah. But I wasn't allowing myself to be me. I wasn't allowing myself to be me, living a heroic, rational life in alignment with the way those folks thought. I just wanted to step into being that person and step out of being me. And I didn't realize that was happening at the time, but I ran away from me for years. The problem is I couldn't get away from me. You know, me kept following me.
The problem in the gift.
yeah. Me kept following me everywhere I went. And so that part of me that I was in denial about, the part of me that was troubled and unclear, the emotional world that Ayn Rand really, I don't know if she disarmed me with regard to the emotional world, but she certainly allowed me to ignore it, and she didn't equip me to deal with the emotional aspect, the psychological aspect of my life. So I would have this whole set of life and activities that were being driven out of my woundedness and confusion, and the part of me that I had put into shadow, that was not in keeping at all with Ragnar. And then I had the part of my life that was Ragnar. And I went through a lot of years living in those two worlds and feeling conflict and guilt because the behavior over here wasn't in integrity with the behavior over there. And as soon as I did one of these, I wasn't that anymore, and I betrayed it all. It was difficult for me. And I went to college and struggled with classes because I was spending too much time smoking pot, doing LSD, and not wanting to do my homework. Okay. But so what I did instead is I created my own program of study and my own great books. And I went into the library deep in the stacks and I started writing treatises and reading Aristotle, spending hours and hours on end. But I wasn't getting my education that I'd signed up for.
Mm-hmm.
And justifying it in my head, because this is a rational university. Ayn Rand tells me it's an irrational university. The academic world is corrupt. She tells me that. So I need to give myself an education. Mm-hmm. And so I'm justified, therefore, And so I used a lot of objectivism as a justification for not dealing with stepping up to being responsible and accountable for things that I was resisting. Mm-hmm. So it was this double-edged sword. My mental acuity became my worst enemy because I could rationalize my way convincingly mm-hmm. into or out of almost anything.
Yes.
So I guess I'll leave it at that for there and open it up to conversation.
Yeah. So lots of insights and issues in there. I'll capitalize on the last thing you said, which is rationalization. What's the difference between rationality and rationalization? And I'll come back to the split that you were talking about between your Ragnar self, your chosen self, right? The ideal self that you determined that you wanted to be, right? Mm-hmm. And then the actual set of experiences that you were having, the actual set of values and desires and the things you cared about and the capacities that you had or did not have, the reality of who you are versus the ideal. I'm fond of saying that reality, right, is the only perfect thing, right? Reality is the only reality can't be any more the way that it is than it already is, right? Yep. It is the one perfect thing, right? And it's mm-hmm. deep. Any direction you go in reality, as far as you go, reality is going to be there, and it's going to be exactly the way that it is. Right? Even when you get into quantum weirdness, we can still, the probabilities are the way they are, right? Reality is this infinitely deep thing. Whereas our ideals are at best pretty much paper thin compared to the depth mm-hmm. of reality, right? We create some ideal of who we think we ought to be or how we want things to be or how other people should be. And we create this ideal, and that ideal is only as rich as we've thought it through. And we rarely think it through very many levels. And so when you contrast this ideal of who I think I should be, how I think the world should be, how I think other people should be, versus the reality of the depth of our real lived experience, that is a very tricky thing. And I agree that one of the traps of Ayn Rand, right, one of the challenges of Ayn Rand is that her characters are so admirable and so perfect that we can think, I need to be like that. And then instead of actually looking at the reality of who we are, what we think, what we feel, what we want, we end up getting caught up in who we think we should be. And that difference, again, the rationality is about dealing with reality. It's not about dealing with your ideals. And when you get stuck in the ideals, you get in rationalization. So I thought I'd say a bunch of that stuff and let you respond.
Well, and I get you, because what I didn't understand at the time, I understood, but I didn't really let myself grasp, is Ayn Rand's characters are works of art. They are highly refined abstractions with all of the irrelevant details of living and life and personality extracted.
Omitted as the case may be.
To present the essence of an experience, an idea, and a value. And so as they should be, and a character in a novel, a hero, should be perfect because it's representing an ideal. My mistake was that somehow a human being was supposed to be one of those. But a human being is not a piece of art. A human being, is, here's the metaphor I use. It's the difference between a road map and the experience of actually driving from one place to another. Everything that's along the side of the road, the bumps in the road, the weather, the people, all of that, in a road map, none of that's there. It's not even hinted at. But it's clear, the road map is clear, and it's real, and it's factual, but that's not reality. And those heroes are like a roadmap for living, and but the experience of reality. So I've come to believe that the only form of perfection that applies to a human being, a real human being, is being perfectly exactly who I am at any given moment, which is always the case. Like you said, reality is always perfect because it can't be anything other than what it is. It is totally exactly right at any given moment. And then my job is to go through those lines of moments and deciding what do I want to do to influence the reality of who I am. So what is the next moment of perfection going to look like? And continuing to unfold moments of perfection in some line of progress that I'm navigating. And so that's become the way I sort of look at being a human being. I had to do a ton of work, right? I had to get myself in real trouble because sooner or later, contradictions don't exist, right? They don't. Sooner or later,
especially
they either get resolved.
Especially between the story you're trying to tell about your life and the reality of that story. Those contradictions will out.
Yes. And in fact, I was living a life in the story and in the shadow. I mean, I really was in many ways being this guy. And then I wasn't. And gradually, though, like Ayn Rand said, evil is the absence of reason, the absence of the light of knowledge and awareness, and it will always grow of itself unless the choice is made to turn the light on. And sooner or later, that shadow side kept getting bigger, and I had a harder and harder time showing up with any real credibility living this other side, and it became empty and almost, non-existent. And so, I had to get to the point where, the shadow pretty much consumed all of who I was. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much had to toss Ragnar out because I couldn't even believe anymore that I could be, I couldn't, if I could fool other people, I certainly couldn't fool me anymore. And at that point, I just hit an empty spot where I knew I needed to change my whole paradigm and approach to how I was living my life. And I had to turn the light on the shadow and step into it. And I needed help to do that from other people, and I needed to find a new basis to live and look at my life. And I became very, very committed to the world of personal growth, personal transformation, personal exploration, and became almost an avocation of pursuing that with a passion for about a decade. That was what I did. I made whatever money I could, and I devoted all my time and effort to really routing around in there and facing what I didn't want to face and coming out the other side better built. And I had to even toss Ayn Rand aside in the beginning and toss everything aside and say, you know what, I'm going to start fresh with an open mind, and I'm going to spend the next several years exploring everything and see what sticks, what falls away, and what comes. And I will then be who I am, built from the inside out.
From reality up.
Yes. Human beings are much like a Frank Lloyd Wright building, right? Form follows function. Mm-hmm. Frank Lloyd Wright designed his buildings from the inside out, and what they look like is what they ended up looking like because of what they were inside, not because you put something on the outside and then figured out what was going to fill in on the inside. That was the way I had been living. Mm-hmm. And so it was a tough period of time, but I came out with all the best of objectivism and then a whole bunch of other stuff that I had just never accounted for or allowed into my life, like spirituality. I actually was forced to find some secular way of experiencing a spirituality in my life that wasn't supernatural, but where I could get the benefits in living and feeling and thinking and being that come from spiritual practices. So maybe I can like steal some of the spiritual practices and leave the deity out. And and so I had to, I literally tossed everything and explored.
You cleaned out the stables.
But what came out of it was remarkable, because I found a way to find versions of all parts of my life, the full 360-degree aspect of human existence, but in ways that fit a rational understanding of reality. And I had to struggle really hard. Like spirituality was a tough one, to untangle that whole mess that tied spirituality to religion, to supernatural beings and mysticism, and then realizing, there's something in all that human beings need, but why do we need the deity? Why can't we get the other stuff? And why should we give up all that to the people who do deity if we don't want to do deity? And so finding a way to untangle all of that, unpack it, and pull the pieces I like, and then repack it in me in a way that was rational, was one of the most challenging undertakings I'd ever been in my life. But it may be now the most important part of what's making me effective in life and drawing people toward me and having an impact in the world, is that I have done that. So it's been quite a journey. The guy I am today, is as objectivist as I ever was, and so much more, and continuing to evolve and be more. And so I'm willing to believe what I believe, and also recognize that I'm learning new things all the time. And reality is more accurate than my mental construct at the time. Reality knows much more than I do. Reality knows everything, if know is an appropriate word. All available information is there. And so what actually comes toward me from reality is what I need. And if it conflicts with what's in my head, I need to relook at what's in my head. And my approach used to be, how can I manipulate what I'm experiencing and rationalize it so I can justify what I have in my head, even when there appears to be a conflict. And so I'm a continually I'm an evolving objectivist, an open system of learning right now, and I have been for probably the last 15 years, and I can't imagine living life in a better way.
For lack of a better term, amen. Amen. Again, to highlight one of the pieces that you were just talking about, is reality is primary, right? Ayn Rand talks about the primacy of existence versus the primacy of consciousness, right? Reality is what it is. Existence exists, right? And to exist is to have an identity. It is to be what it is, right? And we are part of existence. We have an identity. There is a truth, a reality to ourselves. There's a reality to the world. And to be an Ayn Rand hero, right? None of Ayn Rand's heroes made a decision about who they thought they should be, and then tried to retrofit reality into their idea of who they think they should be, right? That's not what an Ayn Rand hero does. The challenge is that when you read her works, you're presented with these ideals, and unfortunately, you're presented with often an attitude of rational and irrational. There's a rational way of doing it, which is Ayn Rand's way, and then everything else is irrational, and that can have a heavy moral and semantic loading to it, where it's like, look, don't be one of the bad guys, be one of the good guys. And if you have anything in your reality that doesn't match this picture, it's reality that's wrong. No. Absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Reality I like to say reality is where all of the action and all of the traction is. Right?
It's interesting. One of the things I dove into in all of my path was landmark education.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a brilliant construct and way of thinking and looking. And they talk about all there is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're continually telling ourselves a story and attaching meaning to it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when I don't know that's what I'm doing, and I collapse the meaning I'm attaching to as if it is reality, mm-hmm. and then I act as if the meaning I'm constructing is reality.
And it becomes more important than reality, yes. And reality becomes something that you sacrifice in order to maintain your current perception, your current interpretation. That is you could say the trap. That's the trap. Yep. We can call it a trap of rationalization. So yes. How I understand Ayn Rand, and my story is not unlike yours, mm-hmm. right? It's not unlike yours in terms of the discovering Ayn Rand and discovering that it's an incredible weapon. It's an incredible weapon if you want to protect yourself in a social interaction, or if you want to dominate a social interaction. You can use her ideas as a weapon. You can use them to shut down conversation rather than opening them up. You can use it to shut down inquiry into, well, so what is reality here? What's really happening here? What do I really think? What do I really feel? What do I want? What do you think? And what do you feel? And what do you want? Not what you should, but what do you actually, and why? Why is that important? Right? And you can use brilliant ideas to shut down the inquiry into what's true. Yeah. Right, and that's tragic. Right, when I similar to you, out in the world, I typically don't talk about Ayn Rand very much. Mm-hmm. I just talk about the principles of focusing on reality, using reason, taking responsibility, demonstrating respect in service of realization. Right, This is how I take metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. Right? I use the principles. When I started this podcast, I actually wrote a piece called "Coming Out of the Ayn Rand Closet." Mm-hmm. Right. And part of the reason why I typically don't talk about Ayn Rand out in the world is, one, just people have such negative reactions to it that it creates unnecessary arguments. And I'm working with clients. I'm like you. I'm working with clients. My job is to help them think through their lives so that they leave their stories and focus more on reality and choose stories that allow them to interact with reality more and more powerfully. Right? To use reason to work with reality, not to use rationalization to avoid reality. Right? If you could say, what's the main problem that people have is that they use rationalizations to avoid reality. So I want to get them to use reason to focus on reality and build in reality. Mm-hmm. And this Ayn Rand can be the greatest tool for that. Right? Mm-hmm. In terms of my own spiritual realization and practice, this non-supernatural, I had a mentor named Jason Alexander who used to talk about exercising the spirits from spirit. Mm-hmm. Yes. Right? And in recognizing who I am in this ongoing, never-ending realization of recognizing and realizing who I am in greater depth. Right? The temptation is always to privilege my ideas over reality. Mm-hmm. And I consider that to be one of Ayn Rand's great strengths. When you look at her heroes never do that. Mm-hmm. Right? Her heroes never put their ideas in front of reality. They're always looking at what is reality. And the character development, when you think about, let's say, Hank Rearden,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could say his central focus of development is that he loves Dagny, and he hates his
Mm-hmm.
wife, and he doesn't respect his
Mm-hmm.
brother, and he feels, you could say, not nauseated at his mother,
Mm-hmm.
and he that's the truth, that's the
Mm-hmm.
reality, but he doesn't want to face it. He doesn't want that to be true. Of course, he should love his wife, and he should love his brother, and he should love his mother, and
Yep.
the fact that he doesn't must mean that there's something wrong with him, rather than recognizing the
And
truth. Yes.
and on the business side, he
Yeah.
was doing the thing he loved, creating the most he was capable of for people he hated, for a society that hated him, and for people he hated, and that was the other conflict that he was in. And so, yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, and his struggle with all of that. His struggle with all of that was part of what developed him and helped
Yes.
him grow.
And you could say that what he learned in the process of the novel, what made him step into his true heroism, is that he came to just say what
Reality.
he chose reality. He came to recognize reality,
Yes.
and to build from reality rather than from his idea of who he thought he should be.
Yep, exactly.
And I'm sure with your clients, this is certainly what I'm working on with my clients constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Constantly, it's okay. So let's start with reality. I like to say, start from where you are, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, people live from their belief systems instead of from reality. And whether their beliefs are articulated and conscious or subconscious and unarticulated, if they're not aware of that's what they're doing, they make all their choices, set all their goals, and all their responses from their current belief set. And then they fight to protect their beliefs against reality. They fight reality to protect their beliefs. And they almost can't not until they realize that that's what's happening. You know, the gift of Landmark was we are all telling ourselves stories constantly about reality. We can't not, because we're human beings. We're meaning-making machines. That's what we do. The trick is to know that's what I do and know my stories aren't reality. And then, like you said a little while ago, I can choose the stories I want to tell myself that will allow me to respond to reality in the most effective way that serves my values and my effectiveness. And so, you know, my clients, for example, one of the biggest challenges, people get a goal in their head or a plan or a vision of the way they want things to be. And we need that, okay? That vision of how I want things to be in any set of circumstances or in my life or in any regard gives me the desire for it, gives me motivation. Mm-hmm. To overcome and drive forward. And the picture gives me at least a sense of direction so I know what to do for my next few moves. The problem comes in when I think this picture I have of how things should be is primary to how things end up being. So the trick is, can I continually form a picture that is desirable and attractive, that gives me a sense of how to act next, and then dump it when what actually happens is different. Mm-hmm. Instead of saying, my God, reality just ripped me off because it didn't give me what I wanted.
Reality didn't match my fantasy. Yes. Therefore, reality's wrong.
Yes. But and see how insane that sounds. But think about it. In our lives, I want to be a lawyer. It's in my head. It's a goal. I'm going to college. I'm taking these classes. I'm going to law school. I'm getting into a law firm. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm after straight line, goal-oriented. And a lot of people walk out of Ayn Rand with that sense of you pick a goal and you go intransiently toward that goal no matter what, right? But that goal is a choice I'm making now based on a very limited set of information compared to reality about myself, about the world, and most importantly, about what hasn't happened yet. So the idea that that picture of where I'm supposed to be a month, 6 months, 5 years, 20 years from now, the farther out I go, the more likely is it's not accurate. It's not really the best place for me that reflects all of who I am and the reality that's going to be happening between now and then. And the arrogance of this little estimate I've made from here with this set of data, looking that far out in a huge infinite set of data, that this is the way it ought to be, and then not allow all that information coming in to adjust.
To either have you rethink your goal and choose a new goal that's more appropriate given what you discover about the world, what you discover about yourself, what you discover about your values, or to enhance and adapt your plan.
Yes.
Right?
To alter it.
Yeah.
So this is
go.
the process I teach them in their businesses when they do strategies, or in their lives as they go through day to day, is yes, pick a goal, develop some next steps toward that goal, and then step back and see what happens. And then if what happens doesn't align with your goal, say, thank you, reality, for showing me what I really need to and what my goal ought to be, and adjust your goal. And then just keep doing that as an iterative process of action, learning, and living. And where you will end up is in the best possible place given all the data available. And isn't that where we want to end up, whether it's our business strategy for 5 years out, which every 90 days we ought to be revisiting and redesigning based on what's happened in those 90 days? I believe in 90-day action plans. And anything farther out than 90 days is too far out to have an action plan. And then every quarter you sit down and you look at that 2-year, 5-year strategy and you revise it based on what you've learned. And then you have another 90-day action plan to take you there. And so these action plans move you here, there, here, there, here, there. But where you end up is with a business that is optimally functioning in every given reality as it unfolds. And that's true of people's lives as well as of organizations. And it's so hard to let go of, I got to get to my goal. And the more reality doesn't match up to my goal, the more I got to struggle and fight and win and overcome, instead of saying, wow, I am learning what I need to know to pursue the right goal. Mm-hmm. It's such a smoother, easier, more serene way of living, and it actually gets me the best results. But it's counterintuitive to the way of thinking that we're normally given.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As you were saying that, one of the metaphors I like to use is I like to use the metaphor of a game. It's like where you're choosing to engage in this process because it's fun, right? You're approaching it as something that you are choosing because that's what you want to do. You're going to do something. Let's do this thing that's actually going to make me wealthier. And I want to get into wealth and profit in just a moment. I want to get into wealth and profit, right? So you choose this game to play, and then you run experiments. You have a series of hypotheses about who you are, what you think is going to work, what's going to move the process forward, and what's going to be valuable. And so you build a plan, and then you execute on the plan, and you're performing an experiment to get data.
Yes. And you're doing it with a team of people who are playing their parts. And then after every couple of plays in a football game, what happens? The quarterback calls a timeout. He goes to the sideline, sits down with the coach, reviews what's happened so far, and comes up with a new set of plays going forward. And that's exactly the game, exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, and so let's take this as a jumping off point into this idea of wealth. Like you say, wealth is not more than money, and so I'd like you to talk about how you understand wealth and profit.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Because I like what you have to say about it.
Go ahead. All right. So it's all about value. Okay, that the concept of value is one of Ayn Rand's most brilliant concepts. It's the core underneath ethics. It's the fundamental idea that ties the fact of my living to how I should live. And so value is the judgment that any particular thing is going to serve the life I want to live in some way. Mm-hmm. It's going to help me fulfill the life I have. And so whatever it is, whether it's money, a person, an idea, a feeling, an experience, a belief, a cause, whatever it is, it being valuable means I think it's going to enhance my life in some way. So value is the core. Now, I can value anything. And the goal of living is to take this life I have that I spend in every moment as I choose what am I going to think about, right? Ayn Rand identified, without calling it, she identified attention as actually the most important investment choice any human being makes at any given time. It's not time. It's not money. It's what am I going to think about next? She talked about that. My choice of what to think about next is my fundamental volition. Okay? So I take this time and attention I have, and I spend it on something instead of something else every moment. Every moment I'm choosing to spend this unrenewable resource I have on something. And the question is, one, am I ending up with more value in my life after making that choice and enacting it, or less? Am I giving up something of greater value in the living of that moment or the taking of that action than what's being brought into my life according to my own values? If I'm ending up with greater value in my life than what it is that I just put forward, I have profited. Profit is simply to be better off after taking an action than before, mm-hmm. in whatever form of value we're talking about. Now, there's also this question of relative value, because I could have done 100 things with that moment of my life or attention. And even if the thing I did left me better off than before, did it leave me the most better off of the other things that I could have been doing? See, it becomes a very rigorous, continual thought process to look at what my options are, to look at the profit equation of that action, and to make sure the profit is the largest profit I could make amongst the options I have available.
And across the values that I'm paying attention to and that I'm caring about.
Yes. Right. So I have to be aware of my values, evolve my values, be clear on my values. I have to have that set of knowledge. And then I have to be aware of my options. And then I have to calculate the profitability of the choices, and then continually make the choice in each next moment of the most profitable undertaking so that the value in my life gets enhanced. So if values are things that add to my life, I call them assets. Mm-hmm. Everything of value that I add to my life is an asset. Then the total sum of everything I care about in my life is my wealth. Wealth is the accumulated value I have in my life at any given time. So I believe having the most of what I care about the most in my life is the measure of success in all forms. At the end of my day, with my last breath, my goal is to have as much of what I care about the most in my life as I possibly can manage to create. But that requires a very rigorous process of living and choosing and awareness. And most of us go through life just bumping along moment to moment with none of that thought process, and hope that we're continuing to make choices in each moment that we not only profit from, but that we profit the most from, and somehow at the end of the day end up with this life full of riches? Or are we continuing to make choices that diminish the value that we've created in our life? And or are we even conscious of making that choice? So that's the way I see value, profit, and wealth as a connected living process. It's not about money, although we have developed the kind of rigor we need to live every area of our life around handling money because we've decided money is very important. So we've come up with a phenomenal science, technology, and engineering of dealing with money. But if we stop and think about it, all that is a way of dealing with value, because money is a token of value. Why can't we put any value in there instead of money and operate with the same thought process with which a great financier manages money? We can. We have to just get past the belief that somehow the rest of life is different than money.
Because money is just a means of exchange. Exchanging what? Values, right?
Yep. Time, people, experiences, beliefs, causes, all of that. Money's just a way of attracting, supporting, and creating all of those things that I want in my life, and exchanging that with other people.
I call it a universal value because it's just something that people are willing to exchange for. If I can have a whole range of values, which might be difficult to barter one at a time, but we translate it into money and then we can use for other things. So it's incredibly useful. But as again, to use your tagline, wealth is more than money. Wealth is more than money, right? It's interesting as you were saying this, because you talk about there's an absolute ROI, right? I enter into a transaction, and on any particular dimension of value that I'm adding, I can see, okay, do I have more of that or do I have less of that coming in, right? So you can say that there's a positive and a negative. I can have, it can be profitable or it can be costly, right? But then once you're in profitable or once you're in costly, now there's scale. This relative, It's this relative value. Am I plus 2 or am I plus 20 or am I plus 2,000? Right. And the word rational, I'm not sure if you've looked at this particular etymology, but the word rational comes from the word ratio. Right? It's about proportion. It's about how do you take different sizes of things and recognize their relative value in relation to one another. You're building ratios, you're building proportions. And so in order to be rational, again, to bring it back to the Ayn Rand hero, Ayn Rand in her appropriate application rather than the unfortunate applications that we sometimes fall into, that we've both fallen into and that many people do, right? To be rational is to recognize that wealth is more than money. And wealth, it's not either or. It's not either I was profitable or I wasn't profitable. It's I was profitable to greater degrees in greater dimensions. And when you can have a relationship, for example, where the kinds of interaction you're having are profitable across a wide range of dimensions, right? Now, the question is, you want to spend time with the people with whom you have the most profitable relationships. You feel the best. You have a better sense of community when you're done. You have a better sense of teamwork. You feel more alive and vibrant, and there's greater trust and intimacy. It's like all of these dimensions. To be rational is to choose to live your life in a way that you get more and more of that. Right?
In the best possible way. I actually consider relationship a currency that we spend. Energy, time, relationship, money, attention. These are things that we're continually spending. And am I spending this on the thing that's going to add the greatest value of what's available to me? So am I having relationships with those people amongst all the people I could spend this moment having relationship with that's going to add the most to my life overall in all of its aspects? And if I am unconscious to it, then I'm just randomly hoping that the numbers add up. If I'm conscious to it and then choosing something different, right, because of the belief systems in my head about, well, I should spend time with them because they're, or I shouldn't spend time with them because they're, I'm then throwing away value deliberately. And that's true of everything I choose to do in my life. There's the process of living life. It justifies and requires the most amount of time, thought, skill, rigor, system, technology, and art of any other human undertaking we have. The very process of living our life, moment to moment, requires that degree of rigor and expertise. Yet, it's the one part of human life that we take for granted, and we live by the seat of our pants. And we put all of that effort and rigor and design into all of the various sub-areas of life. And then just figure life as a whole is supposed to take care of itself. And it ain't like that.
Yeah. So again, we speak about volition. Ayn Rand speaks about volition, the fundamental free will. Right? She suggests that the fundamental choice of free will we have is not do we choose A or B. Right? It's do we choose to focus our awareness to look for where is the greatest rationality? Where is the greatest profit to be made? Right? Am I using my intelligence in any particular moment to ask the question, okay, so where is the profitable choice? How can I most increase my wealth? How can I make my life better? Right? That fundamental choice, that's the fundamental choice of free will. It's to focus on rationality, on, I call it thriving.
Yep.
Right? It's to focus on,
good word.
Yeah, it's to focus on wealth and making profitable choices. And that fundamental choice. And there's the choice to do that or the choice to just relax and kind of coast and hope. I'm not going to actually choose. I'm not going to actually choose.
Choices.
Yes, exactly. And persistence. And knowing what he
Well,
wants.
and in the choices I have to make.
Yes.
So we're about at time. How would you like to wrap up our conversation? And I certainly want to pick it up again on or offline because there's a lot more to talk about.
Yes, yes. So in terms of Ayn Rand, you've recognized that there are limitations to Ayn Rand. You had to abandon Ayn Rand and essentially go away and explore other paths. And then as you explored them, you began to understand essentially how objectivism could be useful as long as it was a tool in service of creating a life. So I'm curious, is there anything that you would suggest to people in terms of how to approach Ayn Rand and objectivism, right? Such that it becomes a tool to create greater wealth and to live a great life, to live, I would call it a heroic life, without getting lost in the traps of idealism in Ayn Rand. Do you have any thoughts on that to close?
So yeah, I would look at Ayn Rand and her work as an open system rather than a closed system. It's a body of knowledge and ideas and understanding and experiences that gives a framework and a set of tools to reach out farther into life, and a place to hang new information and knowledge and understanding, and opening up pathways to learn more and to add to that body of thought and evolve it, and then also to customize it to who I am as a person. If I approach Ayn Rand that way, as a framework and a methodology to go out into life and experience life more effectively, it will serve me well. If I look at it as a closed system that I'm living up to and trying to match and fulfill and stay true to, then it will, I believe, ultimately suffocate me, and it will snuff out the uniqueness of who I am as a being and the very life, blood, and juice of passion of living. Because passion requires flow of blood, knowledge, information, and oxygen into and out of my life all the time, and I can't close the doors.
Yes. Well, and on that note, that sounds like a great place to end it.
Great. Well, I've really enjoyed this. Thank you for your great questions and sharing some of your own experience and insights. Please have me back, and we'll also talk in various.
Yeah, we've got some meta-ethical conversations to have. Perhaps they'll make it into the podcast, perhaps not. So, if people want to learn more about you, what website? How do they contact you?
theWealthSource.com. theWealthSource.com. That's my website. They can contact me, learn about what I do, get lots of phenomenal blogs, ideas, things that we've been talking about that I've developed and others. Because my stand is the source of all the wealth we create is within us. And so my mission in life is to help myself and others maximize the source of wealth so that the wealth continues to be maximized in our lives. That website is the place to go to access me.
theWealthSource.com.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
Great fun, Kim. Thank you for your time, and enjoy your Christmas decorating.
All right. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero podcast is sponsored by the composer Darren John Lewis, whose music I use for this podcast. If you'd like a custom choral or symphonic piece for your special event or celebration, or if you'd just like to hear more of his music, go to darrenjohnlewis.com. That's DARINJOHNLEWIS.com. Thank you, and see you in the next episode of Becoming an Ayn Rand Hero.